status, MSH expression, and oncogenes. So to introduce Dr. Sunil, he is now a known face to us because he attended few of our programs, virtual program, of course, in weekly program and also the preceptorship program. And by this time, we know that he is a really wonderful speaker and he knows where to hit the bully for the clinicians and where is the confusion. So we have 1 hour session. So without wasting any time, I would request our President, Professor M.A. Hai, sir, to formally start the program. Then our speaker can start the program. So to our President, Professor M.A. Hai, sir.
Rahim. Heartiest welcome to all the participants and our today's faculty, Dr. Sunil Pasricha, a friend of ours from Rajiv Gandhi Cancer Institute. Happy that he could join us in the situation of India for COVID-19. Really, we are very sorry. We cannot help whether we can see you. However, we have to continue our request. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. As we know that in colorectal cancer, pathology plays a big role, but now the pathology horizon is expanding, and now the precision oncology, there is a prognostic role and also diagnostic treatment role also there on this precision oncology. So molecular pathology is also important factor. So I'm sure we will be listening to Dr. Sunil and he'll be trying to cover everything by within half an hour. So let us listen to Dr. Sunil, and whatever question you have, please put in the chat box so that we can discuss and we can make ourselves clear. So over to you, Dr. Sunil. Can you please start your presentation?
Thank you, Dr. Kamal, for such a kind introduction. Good afternoon, everybody. So I'll be talking about the histopathology reporting of the colorectal cancer, what a clinician needs to understand. So it is the third most commonly diagnosed cancer with 1.84 million cases in 2018. It's the fourth leading cause of cancer mortality worldwide, and it is a consequence of multi-step tumorigenesis of several genetic and epigenetic events. The estimated 5-year survival in the metastatic setting is only around 13%. So definitely early diagnosis and evidence-based timely management can improve the disease-free survival and overall survival. So it is a multidisciplinary approach for the management of a colorectal cancer, and the pathologists play a central role in the diagnosis and to determine the prognostic factors that guide the further course of treatment. And the role has now been expanded to determine not only just to diagnose, but also to determine the predictive factors or the mutations for the actionable targets. So a standardized and well-informative histopath report is essential. So, and these are the advantages of the standardized reporting, that it enables the standardized diagnosis and treatment. The checklist will ensure that all relevant prognostic factors have been addressed and also help to select the same patient groups and exchange information in multi-center clinical trials or international studies. So before informative histopathology, reporting, a good gross examination is of paramount importance. That following parameter needs to be documented: the site, location, extent, dimensions, the type of the growth, whether infiltrative, polypoidal, ulcer-infiltrative. However, the most important thing is the diligent inspection of the depth of the invasion and the serosal involvement. And one need to submit at least 2 sections from the tumor with the overlying serosa where it's in the closest relation. And the gross inspection of margins and distance needs to be done, of which the circumferential is very important. I'll discuss later. So coming to the anatomical, subsites of colon and rectum. So the relationship to the peritoneum is very important. Like cecum, it is entirely covered by the peritoneum, has no mesentery. Ascending and descending colon are retroperitoneal, so they are covered by the serosa on anterolateral surface, while the posterior surface is a bare area that lacks covering. Transverse colon and sigmoid colon are totally intraperitoneal. They have mesentery. Rectum, the upper 1/3 has a serosa on the anterolateral surface. The middle third has only on the anterior surface, while the lower third has no peritoneal covering. So when the gross examination of a rectum comes, so this is how that we have to ink the bare area. So anteriorly, one can see that the lower 1/3 of the rectum is completely bare from all sides, and the posterior is also completely bare. So we have to ink the bare area. The serosal or the peritonealized surface, we don't have to ink it. So this is a very important, that is the total meso excision grading, which is the documentation needs to be done in clear rectum. So it is a surgical plane of TMAC. The TME encases the rectum, mesentery, all regional lymph node and constitutes the Walder's fascia. And it is relevant for both LAR and APR specimens. So these are the grades 1, 2, and 3. The 1 is complete, in which the mesorectum is bulky, intact, smooth. There are no defects, and if at all the defects are there, they are not deeper than 5 millimeter. There should be no coning. The margins are, that is, the Walder fascia is smooth, regular. The nearly complete grade 2, they have a moderate bulk, irregular, but the defects are subtle. They don't invade up to the muscularis propria. Coning is moderate and CRM is bit irregular. But the incomplete, if you see, it has a little bulk. The defects can be seen going down to the muscularis propria. The coning is marked and CRM is irregular. So this is a complete. So one can see that the bulk is there. The Walder's fascia is intact. There is no coning, no defects. This is nearly complete. One can see minor defects are there, but not going up to the muscularis propria. This is incomplete. One can see the defects are deeper. There is a coning and the bulk is poor, and one can see the defects are going to the muscularis propria. So what is the significance of the complete TME, which is actually a high quality TME surgery? So the high quality TME surgery reduces the local recurrence rate from 25 to 9% or even less. The adjuvant therapy in the presence of high quality TME may further reduce the recurrence to 2.6%, and high quality TME surgery increases the 5-year survival rate from 48 to 68%. And the importance was established long back in the Dutch multi-center randomized trial, where the study comprises of 180 patients, and so one can see over here that this is the Kaplan-Meier graph and the complete mesorectum, and this is the incomplete mesorectum. So there is a good prognostic separation of the curves. Those with the complete mesorectum had a very good overall survival and a very reduced local and distance recurrence rate, which was 36% as compared, which was 20.3%, and those with the incomplete, they had the local and distant recurrence of 36.1%, which was statistically highly significant. So coming to the tumor histopathological types, so this is the list of the histological classification as per the WHO 5th edition. So we are all familiarized, and the adenocarcinoma NOS is the most common. So why it is important to correctly type the histopathology diagnosis? Because some histological types, they have a distinct implications, like mucinous carcinoma. The response to chemotherapy is poor. They have a tendency for a MSI high. The signet ring cell carcinoma, they have a high incidence of MSI again, and their association with the Lynch syndrome. The medullary carcinoma, they have a good prognosis. They have a high incidence of MSI and BRAF mutations. Then you have a micropapillary carcinoma having a poor prognosis and a high incidence of nodal metastasis. Serrated adenocarcinoma, they have a poor prognosis. Adenoma like adenocarcinoma, a new entity, they have a favorable prognosis. They have a KRAS mutation. And the undifferentiated carcinoma, they rarely show MSI instability. So coming to the grading, it is determined by the extent of the gland or the tubule formation by the tumor. It is applicable to adenocarcinoma NOS type only, because other histological types, they have their own prognosis. For example, medullary carcinoma, although it is a syncytial, it's a poorly differentiated, but it behaves as a low-grade tumor with a good prognosis. In spite of that, it appears poorly differentiated. So coming to the depth of the invasion, that is at T stage, we are all familiarized, and the most important, the staging that carries a great implication is the T4A, that when the tumor invades the visceral peritoneum, and it is difficult, sometimes to assess this, and we have to take a judgmental call. So what are the challenges? The inter-observer variability in the histological assessment of PT3 versus T4. So a visceral peritoneal involvement T4A is a well-established adverse prognostic factor in stage 2 and stage 3 disease. As per definition, involvement of serosal lining is a diagnostic of T4A. Underreporting of T4A is more common. A study by Stewart et al. In a review of 80 cases of stage 2 colon cancer and demonstrated the serosal involvement in 20 cases that had originally been reported as negative, that is T3. So what are the reasons for the underreporting? Because of the prominent fibroinflammatory reaction to the tumor, which obscures the mesothelial lining, makes it difficult to confirm the breach, and peritoneal involvement occurs in the deep serosal cleft, which can be easily overlooked. So here, if you see that sometimes, this deep clefts, the serosal involvement is there. So the section is not submitted from this side. So you have to stretch the specimen and you have to submit the section from this particular side. Otherwise, the T4A will be missed. So sometimes you have inflammatory response along the serosal surface. So at that time, you should go for a deeper or a multi-level examination. So deeper sections will help. And here you see on the deeper section, the tumor is now breaching the serosa. So the recommendation is that the tumor less than 1 millimeter from the serosal surface with a serosal or fibroinflammatory reaction is unclear. Multiple level sections or additional section of the tumor should be examined in case for assigning the T stage T3 versus T4A, which is very imperative for our decision making. And elastic stains are not recommended to resolve the issue. So what are the importance? So the in the T staging, some factors that needs to be in account while doing the T staging. The presence of LV tumor emboli is not considered when determining the depth of invasion. For example, if the tumor infiltrates the muscle, but the LV emboli is seen in the subserosa, it will be T2 and still not T3. The intramural extension of the tumor from one subsite into adjacent does not affect the T classification. For example, a cecal carcinoma invading the ileum or a rectal carcinoma invading the anal canal. So there will be no upstaging of the T stage. Whereas a transmural extension into another organ is necessary for T4B designation, like a transverse colon invading into the liver. So tumor that is adherent to the other organ grossly is classified as clinically T4B. However, the T stage will depend on anatomical and histological depth of the colorectal wall invasion. The T4A category is not applicable in the non-peritonealized portion of the colorectum, including the posterior aspect of the ascending and descending colon and lower 1/3 of the rectum. So if you see this figure, this is the ascending colon. So on the interior aspect, if the tumor grows from the lumen and reaches up to the serosa, so it is really considered as a T4A. And this is not a margin involvement because serosa is not a margin, it lines the space. Whereas if the tumor goes posteriorly and reaches up to the resection margin, so it will be considered as T3, but circumferential resection margin involved. So coming to the LV emboli, the extramural venous invasion has been demonstrated by multivariate analysis to be an independent adverse prognostic factor in multiple studies and is a risk factor for liver metastasis. Small vessel includes lymphatics, capillaries, venules. They are devoid of smooth muscle layer and elastic lamina, although they also needs to be documented as an invasion if it is there. However, the small vessel invasion is associated with lymph node metastasis and adverse outcome. PNI is also independent prognostic factor and adverse effect has been shown. So coming to the margins, they are usually not much of a concern. A distal or a proximal margin of 2 centimeters is adequate for T1, T2 tumors. The 1 centimeter clearance may be even sufficient. And if the carcinoma is arising in the background of inflammatory bowel disease, like ulcerative colitis, or so proximal and distal resection margins should be meticulously evaluated for dysplasia and active inflammation to prevent the recurrence. So a radial or which is a circumferential margin that needs to be evaluated diligently, and serosal surface should not constitute a surgical margin. So what is a positive circumferential margin or a radial margin? When the tumor is within less than 1 millimeter from the non-peritonealized bare surface, it is considered as a positive. A positive margin in the rectal cancer increases the risk of recurrence by 3.5-fold and double the risk of death from the disease. A positive CRM, the circumferential resection margin, can be due to direct extension of the tumor, that is an infiltrative tumor, or there can be a tumor within the lymph node, that is a metastatic lymph node, or LV emboli within 1 millimeter of the CRM. So the type of affected tissue should be always be mentioned because the metastatic lymph node or LV emboli within 1 millimeter of the CRM was associated with a much lower risk of recurrence than a positive, frank positive CRM due to direct tumor extension or infiltration. Coming to the buddings, very important parameter. It is a well-known independent adverse prognostic factor. The presence of single cells or small cluster of less than 4 cells at the advancing front of the tumor. This is the defining criteria, and it is reported in a selected hotspot at 20x field, which is approximately 0.785 millimeter square. So 3-tier scoring is recommended. So it can be a low when it is 0 to 4 buds, intermediate when 5 to 9, and high when 10 or more than 10. So in this micro photograph in the A figure, one can see there are no buddings. Here the buddings are low, just 3. Here 5 buddings are seen with this arrow, and here a lot of buddings are there. So this is high. So what are the implications? So patient diagnosed with the colorectal carcinoma with the submucosal invasion, that is T1, in the polypectomies, the tumor buddings are associated with the increased risk of nodal metastasis, and hence they are a subsequent potential surgical candidate. Stage 2 colorectal carcinoma with a high grade tumor buddings show worse disease-free survival. Hence, it is useful to select the patient for adjuvant therapy. So it is a risk factor in a stage 2 colorectal carcinoma when you have to decide for giving a adjuvant therapy. So coming to the tumor regression grade, NACT for the downstaging followed by curative resection has been established as a standard treatment for a patient with a locally advanced CR rectum. Pathological complete response is associated with significant better prognosis. The minimal residual disease has shown to have a better prognosis than gross residual disease. So what are the special considerations? If the tumor is grossly visible, a minimum of 4 sections needs to be submitted. If grossly there is no residual tumor, then entire tumor bed, which should be correlated with the radiology reports previous, needs to be submitted before labeling it as a pathological complete response in the report. Acellular pools of mucin should not considered as a viable tumor. You need to demonstrate a nucleated viable cell. And tumor regression grade should be assessed only in the primary tumor. The lymph node metastasis should not be included in the assessment. So these are the various proposed the tumor regression grading schemes, and what we are following here is the AJCC cap. That is the grade 0 when no residual tumor, grade 1 when there is a single cells or rare small groups of cancer cells, grade 2 more than single cells or small or more than a rare small groups of cancer cells with evident tumor regression, and grade 3 is when there is an extensive residual tumor, there is no significant regression. So regional lymph node assessment. So we are all familiarized with this nodal staging. The N1C needs a special attention that it's when there are no regional lymph nodes are positive and there are some tumor deposit in the subserosa, mesentery or non-peritonealized pericolic or perirectal mesorectal tissue is there, then only we label it as a N1C. But if nodal mets are there, so this category is invalid. So special consideration, the node status is a major determinant of the post-operative treatment. Patient with a positive lymph node, that is stage 3, are offered adjuvant chemotherapy. The National Quality Forum in US lists the presence of at least 12 lymph node in the surgical resection among the key quality measures. The lymph node metastasis frequently involve the small lymph nodes, even less than 5 millimeter. Hence, all lymph nodes should be retrieved and examined. Unlike in a head and neck cancer, you see the probability of metastasis increases when the nodal size is big. So that's not the case in the colorectal. Even a small nodes can be positive while a larger node can be negative. So a yield of minimum 12 nodes are just passing marks and not equated to with the merit. So one should isolate as many as lymph nodes as possible. The clinical outcome in stage 2 disease is linked to the lymph node harvest. A subset of stage 2 tumors with a low lymph node yield, that is less than 12 lymph nodes, would represent a missed stage 3 tumor and behave as such. For post-NACT specimen, a yield of at least 8 lymph nodes in a surgical specimen is considered satisfactory. So what are the factors that influence the nodal yield? There can be a surgeon or a specimen-related factor which are related to the length of the specimen resected, pathologist-related factor like skill, diligence, and the method used in retrieving the lymph node, and patient-associated factor like a fewer lymph nodes will be found in the obese, elderly who have received NACT or a right-sided colonic cancer. So coming to the molecular testing in the colorectal carcinoma. So basically why there is a need, because there are some limitation of the conventional biological characteristic. Despite the same disease stage, the patient exhibit considerable variability in the clinical outcome. The histopathological features are not just sufficient to address these issues. The patient who undergoes surgery, approximately 1/3 will experience recurrence, which needs to be identified post-surgery for the treatment intensification. And also prediction of the drug resistance still remains a big challenge. And also there is a challenge for the judicious selection of the candidates of the immune checkpoint inhibitors due to high cost. So there is a felt need to develop these biomarkers to address these problems. So what are the aims of the biomarker testing in the colorectal carcinoma? They are to detect the Lynch syndrome, to predict the response to anti-EGFR therapy, therapeutic decision-making in stage 2 colorectal cancer, prognostic significance and therapeutic monitoring, and selecting the candidates for immune checkpoint inhibitors. So these are the classification, like 96% they are sporadic, inherited are 4%, and among the category of sporadic, that is 96%, 84% are attributed to the chromosomal instability, while the 12% are attributed to the MSI high through the CpG island methylator phenotypes, that is SIMP pathway. and less than 1% are due to the chromosomal instability due to mutation in the APC gene and mutation associated polyposis, and MSI high in the inherited category, 3% are attributed to the Lynch syndrome due to germline mutation in the MMR gene. So the molecular biology of the left-sided and the right-sided actually colonic cancer are different. So in the right-sided, you see a mucinous histology, older age, poor survival, more common in females. They have a BRAF mutation. They have a high SIMP or a deficient or a MSI high. Whereas on the left sided, if you see, they are occurring more in the younger age. They have a comparatively better survival, more common in males. They have a SIMP low. However, they show DD, that is a deficient MMR and MSI high. So this is the genomic and the transcriptomic classification. I have taken this table from the WHO latest edition, 5th edition. And so this is the genomic classification based on the DNA profiling. And this is the transcriptomic classification based on the gene expression profiling, that is the RNA. So the consensus molecular subtype 1 is basically, it goes along with the hypermutated type, which has actually MSI high. They have a SIMP high, they have a BRAF mutation, and they have a low somatic copy number aberrations. And they are the basically more responsive to the immunotherapy. So I'll not go into the details because rest are still in research. So what are the predictive factors? So there are some established biomarkers which have actually stood the test of the time, and some are the emerging biomarkers. So so we'll take on this one by one. So in established biomarker, it is a MSI testing by immunohistochemistry. So MSI is caused by the mutation in the MMR gene with consequent inability to correct the DNA error that actually takes place during the cell replication. Genes are inactivated as a result of sporadic MLH1 promoter hypermethylation, or there can be a germline mutation in the MLH1, MSH2, MSH6, or PMS2 genes, which are Lynch syndrome. And in 2019, the NCCN recommendation is that MSI status should be evaluated in all the newly diagnosed colorectal cancer cases. So by immunohistochemistry, how we report is that if there is no loss of nuclear expression of the MMR protein, so we label it MMR proficient, and it signifies a low probability of MSI high. And if there is a loss of nuclear expression of one or more than one MMR proteins, we label it as a MMR deficient, and it signifies a high probability of MSI high. So this is the micro photograph. One can see that this left side is the normal colon. We can see the nuclear staining in the normal colonic gland, and right side the staining is retained in the tumor. So basically this is MMR proficient, so low probability of MSI high. And in this scenario, one can see that the nuclear staining is still retained in the normal colon. Actually, it acts as an internal control, and it's a validity of the test. But on the right side, you see that the tumor is devoid of any immunoexpression, so it is MMR deficient. So coming to the molecular testing, the demonstration of germline mutation is the gold standard for the diagnosis of Lynch syndrome, and PCR amplification of the specific MS repeats. We take it for the MSI testing, and MSI is defined as a change of any length due to either insertion or deletion of the repeated units in the microsatellite within the tumor as compared to the normal. So commercially available kits for MSI testing that utilizes the 5 mononucleotide markers, and it is labeled as stable when there is no instability of the mononucleotide markers, MSI low when 1 out of the 5 show instability, and MSI high we label when more than or equal to 2 mononucleotide markers show instability. So what are the advantages of the IHC? It is readily available. The key advantage is that you evaluate the individual gene defect. A molecular testing PCR reveals MSI high may indicate either a sporadic or a Lynch syndrome. The same dilemma will be there if the IHC testing shows loss of nuclear expression of MLH1. But the greatest strength of immunohistochemistry is that if immunohistochemistry testing shows a loss of MSH2 or it shows an individual loss of PMS2 or MSH6, they are exclusively described for the patient with the Lynch syndrome. So one can straight away proceed with the germline testing. What are the advantages of the PCR? That is a molecular method. They are highly sensitive, and MSI testing may be positive and helps to detect Lynch syndrome when MMR testing by immunohistochemistry is false proficient, as it can seen in very few cases, when due to the mutation that leads to formation of a truncated protein which still retains the antigenicity to give the positive reaction, IHC reaction. So this is the protocol. If there is on IC, if there is a MSH2 loss or isolated loss of PMS2 or MSH6, you can label it as a Lynch syndrome, go for a germline mutation testing. But if there is a MLH1 loss, go for a BRAF mutation testing. If it is positive, you can label it sporadic, nothing to be done further, consider it sporadic. If there is a negative, the dilemma persists, go for a methylation specific PCR, that is a SIM pathway. If it is positive, label it sporadic, no further testing. If it is negative, label it as a Lynch syndrome. Again, go for germline mutation analysis. And in Lynch syndrome, more than 90% of the cases, they show germline mutation in MLH1 and MSH2. So what are the prognostic significance of the MSI high or a deficient MMR tumors? So it's a good prognostic biomarker for stage 2 colorectal cancer patients. The adjuvant chemotherapy can be avoided in the patient where MSI high has been documented. It is also a poor prognostic biomarker for stage 4 colorectal cancer patient. For stage 3, the prognostic, there is no significant prognostic relevance. And although it predicts the response to immunotherapy in stage 4 disease. And it was established during the phase 2 trials. And the MMR status predicted the clinical benefit of immune checkpoint blockade with pembrolizumab. And pembrolizumab, as we all know, is approved in the patients with the advanced cancer and MSI high status in a tissue agnostic fashion. Nivolumab has also provided a durable response and disease control as well as long-term survival in the pre-treated patient with the MSI high or a deficient MMR patients. So FDA has approved pembrolizumab, nivolumab, or the combination of nivo and ipilimumab for stage 4 metastatic colorectal cancer after prior chemotherapy. Coming to the KRAS and NRAS mutation analysis, it is required for a frontline anti-EGFR treatment decision making for the metastatic colorectal cancer. So the frequency of KRAS is around 40 to 50% and NRAS is 3 to 5%. The mutation in KRAS and NRAS, they are actually predictive of a lack of benefit for the anti-EGFR treatment. And the patient with the RAS wild type who are left-sided, they have demonstrated excellent outcomes with the anti-EGFR based therapy. So 90% of the mutations are detected in exon 2 on codon 12 and 13. However, as per the NCCN guidelines, you have to go for expanded or extended RAS panel, taking care of exon 3 and exon 4 as well, which covers the codons 59, 61, 117, and 146. So we are doing it by the real-time PCR. So two large randomized phase 3 clinical trials established the predictive value of KRAS for anti-EGFR treatment. Panitumab and cetuximab were compared to the best supportive care in the patient with the colorectal carcinoma refractory to chemotherapy, and the response rate of panitumab was 17% for the wild type KRAS, while 0% for the mutant cohort. Moreover, combined chemotherapy, either FOLFIRI or FOLFOX with the anti-EGFR antibodies was related to achievement of the better response rate, disease-free survival, and overall survival in the wild-type KRAS group. Even the meta-analysis of 11 studies also confirmed the similar findings. Coming to the BRAF mutation, so it occurs in around 8% of the advanced disease and approximately 14% with the localized stage 2 and 3. The BRAF mutation is associated with a shorter disease-free survival and overall survival in MSI low and microsatellite stable tumors, while the prognosis is not affected by a MSI high category. So, which is a very important finding to note. And although few studies have shown that BRAF mutation predict the response to anti-EGFR therapy, it is responsible for additional 12 to 15% of the patient with the wild type KRAS tumor who fail to respond to anti-EGFR monoclonal treatment. So there is a evidence that is accumulating. However, at this point of time, there is insufficient evidence to recommend that BRAF status as a predictive molecular biomarker for response to anti-EGFR inhibitor. So the role is more prognostic as of now. So we are doing it again with the RT-PCR, and it is now recommended that BRAF mutation status is assessed alongside that of RAS for a prognostic assessment and for selection for clinical trials. An open label phase 1 or 2 study demonstrated that metastatic colorectal carcinoma with the BRAF V600E mutation receiving a triple therapy comprising of dabrafenib, trametinib, and panitumab had a numerically improved overall response rate as compared to those receiving the double therapy comprising of panitumab plus either a dabrafenib or trametinib. So coming to the emerging biomarkers, since the time allotted is only 30 minutes, so I'm just taking only that emerging biomarker which we are actually using. So I'm not discussing the other emerging biomarkers because they are not in the practical use as of now. So HER2 amplification and overexpression has been detected in 5% of the KRAS wild-type tumors and has been attributed for resistance to anti-EGFR therapy. So combination treatment with trastuzumab and lapatinib has resulted in 35% overall response rate and a median disease-free survival of approximately 5.5 months in a heavily pretreated patient harboring HER2 amplified colorectal carcinoma. So these findings supports the role of HER2 overexpression as a predictive biomarker of an anti-HER2 treatment response in this subset of the metastatic colorectal carcinoma. So to conclude, the purpose of standardized histopathology report is to provide all relevant diagnostic, prognostic, and predictive biomarkers. The current and evolving biomarkers in the management of the colorectal carcinoma is aimed at detecting the Lynch syndrome, predicting the response to anti-EGFR therapy, decision-making for adjuvant chemotherapy in stage 2 cases, monitoring the therapeutic response, selecting the candidates for immune checkpoint inhibitors. As a targeted therapies, they continue to emerge. The knowledge and implementation of predictive and prognostic biomarker will become increasingly important. Thank you. I'm happy to take any questions if you have.
Thank you very much. I think it was quite elaborate and you have covered almost everything. I mean, you didn't, I wanted to make a list of questions, but I see that you have covered all the questions. So thanks for a great presentation, Dr. Sunil.
Thank you, sir.
So, can you stop the screen share now?
Yeah.
Okay. So first, let me take the question from the chat box. Dr. Arman, I think you have a question. Would you like to ask your question? Arman Reza Chaudhary. So is there any special requirements in the histopathology lab to identify tumor budding, or anybody can just do it? Dr. Sunil.
Yeah. Is there any special requirement in the histopathology lab? No, it is just a routine. When you are doing your HND examination, you can do it at the time of reporting the specimen. There is no special requirement for that. It's just a routine HND examination.
Yeah, but the important point, Arman, is that maybe sometimes we are not getting these reports. Now we need to ask for our pathologist, because many study has proved that tumor budding is an independent prognostic factor for stage 2 colorectal cancer. So whenever we are getting the report, sometimes maybe our colleagues are not missing it. So we can ask and definitely they will go. So if you ask 2 or 3 times, next time they will already will give you. So that is the technique.
So what can you recommend is that, so the way we are reporting, while reporting the specimen, we have a checklist, with us. So when the checklist is there, you need to put everything in the slot. So it will get filled by default.
So now the next question is from Shahida Alam, Associate Professor NICRH.
Should I proceed?
Yeah, please.
Okay. So thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. So according to the consensus,
sorry, I cannot hear you actually.
Am I on?
Yeah, now it's okay.
Yeah. According to the consensus guideline, the anti-EGFR therapy is only indicated for wild-type KRAS and NRAS mutation in left-sided colon only. So what is the role of doing KRAS and NRAS mutation in right-side metastatic colon cancer? Is there any role?
Yeah, it is indicated for that also. You have to do for the KRAS and NRAS for because if you are planning for a anti-EGFR therapy, it is a prerequisite that KRAS and NRAS has to be wild type. Otherwise, it's not going to be of use.
Her question is, we need to do it the right-sided also. Because
yes.
So it can be for both sides. Even the prevalence is more on the left side, but there is low rate in the right, but we need to do it on the both sides.
But all the recommendations of anti-EGFR for left side, not for right side. No, Kamal bhai?
Lima, I'm not sure about it, but as I know that the prevalence is more on the left.
Yeah.
If it is wild type, you can go for both any side. But the response is, it should be with wild type only.
See, what you are telling is the probability of having, the KRAS on the. But when you are dealing with a single patient, you cannot go with the probability. You have to be definite. You have to be sure of that you are giving a cetuximab or anti-EGFR therapy. So the patient has to be a wild type KRAS.
So Lima, the question is probability is low, but if you get a wild type, you can go for that side also.
But if we want to go anti-angiogenesis, that is Bevacizumab, without any biomarker testing, we can go directly.
Exactly.
No?
Yes. Bevacizumab have the advantage of going without any marker, but cetuximab need to have a wild type mutation. But again, if you look at the survival, we will discuss it later on that this cetuximab have a slightly higher percentage than in wild type than bevacizumab. So this is another area, and hopefully in the coming days we'll be discussing on that. But yes, true. If you want to use bevacizumab, you don't need to have any marker.
Molecular testing.
So coming back to this, you have mentioned the margin issue. Can you please put some light on the polypectomy specimen? Sometimes we get a polyp dissected and it is adenocarcinoma. So from the pathological point of view, what more we need to know about this polyp when we are coming to a conclusion that shall we go for more surgery or with?
So you have, so the pathologist, that has to go with the, there is a Haggett's level classification. So that at what certain level of the Haggett's levels are described. So at what point of level you are getting the infiltration of the adenocarcinoma, whether it is going into the exophytic part or it is coming into the parent, that is the in line with the colonic mucosa. So the margin has to be, if it is a T1, T2 tumor, so even a 1 centimeter clearance is good enough. So basically, two things one has to see. One has to precisely, type the extent of the infiltration of the adenocarcinoma. That is actually essential.
Thank you. So the message is that when it's a sessile type, it's a negative margin, and if it is a lower grade, no LBSI, then only we can go away with the polypectomy. Otherwise, if there is some adverse features, our surgeon colleague need to go back and look for a bigger surgery. Only polypectomy is not enough, because sometimes margin reporting is also difficult, because at the time of polypectomy, they were not sure that they were getting adenocarcinoma there.
Yeah.
So we see that there is a in stage 2 PNI positive group have DFS of 82% compared to 29%. So PNI is a very bad prognostic factor for stage 2 colon cancer. So would you try to make some comment on that? Because even if I touched it, because when I was going through, it was very surprising that 29 versus 82, it's a huge difference for becoming PNI positive and negative in stage 2 colon.
Yeah, so it needs, definitely. So while reporting the PNI, one should be meticulous. Like the criteria is that the 1/3 of the circumference of the nerve should be entrapped by the tumor to label it as a PNI positive, and one has to also document whether the PNI is intratumoral or extratumoral, because it is said that when like in head and neck cancer, the extratumoral PNI is more meaningful when it is away from the tumor. So it carries more. It has a more tendency, that tumor getting, carried away from the distant site as from the primary. You can have a mesorectal, or you can have a pericolic deposits, tumor deposits, that. So PNI should always be incorporated in the reporting. Yes.
Yeah. So to our colleagues, I want to mention that from now onwards, we should not miss PNI. If it is missing, we should ask for it, because it is a huge prognostic factor, now independent prognostic factor. I mean, sometimes it is more important than LVSI also in the survival, especially in stage 2 colon cancer. So,
and one should write whether it's a
extratumoral.
And one should always mention whether extratumoral, because maybe when we start accumulating this data, maybe tomorrow we can come up with some more prognostic separation, whether the like in head and neck cancer, the extratumoral is now more meaningful as compared to intratumoral.
Yeah. Regarding the margin, you said that when you were telling that the area covered with peritoneum and area not covered with peritoneum, you ink the area.
Yeah.
So we know the radius and the vertical margin, we know 1 centimeter clearance, but when the circumferential margin, so can you please a bit more explain that in the area where there is no peritoneal covering, but there when the dissection is done, how we need to put a
like for example, in a rectum, if you see the serosa is covering the anterolateral surface of the upper 1/3 of the rectum. The middle 1/3 of the rectum is covered by the serosa only on the in the middle 1/3. So the middle 1/3 of the rectum has a serosal covering on the anterior aspect, while the lower 1/3 of the rectum, if you see, it is totally devoid of serosa from all sides. So the whole 360-degree, the lower 1/3 of the rectum is a bare area. So the whole circumference is the margin in the lower 1/3 of the rectum. But if you see the middle 1/3 of the rectum, so only the posterior part is the middle 1/3 rectum, the posterior lateral is the bare area. And the upper 1/3 of the rectum, only the posterior part is the bare area. So you need to ink only the bare area. The serosal is not a margin. Involvement of a serosa is equivalent to T4, but not a margin involvement. Whereas the involvement of a resection margin, that is the bare area, inked margin, is a involvement of the margin, but it is not a T4, it is T3.
So we can see that here is a interesting thing. Even T3 has a worse prognosis than T4 when it is a non-serosal area,
Yeah.
that is when it is a positive margin. So even it is T3, but it is a positive margin.
Yes.
So
Yes.
it makes a big difference. So we need to understand this thing. And sometimes it is recommended in the guideline that when surgeon colleagues are doing the surgery in the non-serosal area, when they put out the specimen, they should mark it so that the pathologist can more identify this area was dissected, this area. So for us, the clinician, we need to know that where from they have taken the margin. It is the non-serosal area, and that is more important. Even it is T3, but we need to consider as positive margin, and we need to consider it as a worse prognostic outcome. So regarding the lymph node, Dr. Sunil, you have mentioned that 12 is the minimum. So I was reading the article, it was quite surprising that till now I was quite happy with 12 number. Then I read that 12 is not the, it is not the happy moment. It is the bare minimum.
Yeah.
So more the node yields, better the information.
Definitely. The probability increases. Yeah.
So regarding the micrometastasis, even the small number of tumor cells present, will you consider it as a positive node or not?
Yeah, it is considered as a positive, but it goes with the label MI. Like if the size of is less than 2 millimeter. But if you have one node which is frankly positive and the other node which is having less than 2 millimeter, then you will not consider it as a MI. If you get a single node with more than 2 millimeter, all other nodes you will also consider as a frank metastasis. You will not label it as a MI for that. Only when none of the metastatic node, the dimension of the tumor is more than 2 millimeter. So if the dimension of the tumor is less than 2 millimeter, none of the node is showing more than 2 millimeter dimension, then only you will label it frank metastasis. Otherwise, less than 2 millimeter, you will label it as a MI, micromets.
Okay, so our target will be that if it is less than 12 nodes in stage 2, so we will request the pathologist colleagues to go back to look for the nodes, whether they can find out more.
Definitely, you have to revisit. The pathologist has to revisit, and I have mentioned in my slides also that getting a 12 node is not is just a passing marks. They are not merit. So it is just a bare satisfactory. That's it.
So to our the junior colleagues, the most important thing is that if there is less than 12 nodes, then we may request our pathology colleague to revisit and the specimen and whether they can find some more nodes and give us some information. So I think there are some questions. Ali Imran Rana, how many specimen is required in case of colonoscopic biopsy? Dr. Sunil.
Yeah.
How many specimens required in case
of
colonoscopic biopsy?
So specimen, as such, you cannot quantify it. It needs to be, a representative, and it should have a, submucosa at least included. The reason is that invasion beyond mucosa, only you label it as a invasive carcinoma in a colorectal. So if there is a invasion only within the lamina propria in the colorectal biopsy specimen, I cannot label it as a frank, because if you see the cap staging, if the invasion is within the lamina propria, it is the staged as TIS in situ. So you have to demonstrate the invasion in the submucosa to label it as a frank invasive adenocarcinoma that you can take the patient for surgery. So the biopsy should be at least taking some part of submucosa. Even if it is an exophytic tumor, you have to take some submucosa in the biopsy.
So, I mean, we need enough material to conclude that it is an invasive adenocarcinoma.
You need to demonstrate the invasion at least in the submucosa.
Yeah. So, I think the answer of Dr. Riyad already given. Me and Dr. Shahida had a discussion for bevacizumab there is now no role of KRAS mutation. Dr. Arman, regarding giving adjuvant treatment in stage 2 colon cancer, any one of the bad prognostic factor is enough to take the decision. Are you mentioning about the MSI? Sorry, bad prognostic in the histopathological bad prognostic factor you are telling. Okay, Dr. Persisa, he is asking that we know there are some bad prognostic factor like margin, LVSI.
Yes.
So anyone is enough to give
So,
the adjuvant.
See, that call a medical oncologist has to take, because as a pathologist, I can just, while reporting my case, I have to, I'm incumbent upon, to list all the important factors like, serosal involvement is there, tumor buddings are high, or if the lymph nodes are even less than 12, that also considered as a risk factor. One has to, even in a stage 2. So that's actually a medical oncologist call, it's his prerogative, not mine.
So Arman,
The oncologist has to take a judgmental call. Yeah.
The stage 2 is a, it's a gray zone. So sometimes you can come out without a treatment. Sometimes you need to give treatment. Sometimes you need to choose even 3 cycles or 6 cycles. So there are some strict criteria. You need to find out the risk factors. As he was telling, even the inadequate node dissection is also a justification of giving adjuvant chemotherapy. But now the question is whether more is good or less is good. So I think still I can tell you that in one sense that yes, if you find a risk factor, you need to give adjuvant. But I think we will have more discussion in the coming days when we will have some discussion on adjuvant treatment. So now I think in the pathology as we have covered. So in the molecular testing, you say, I like the slide that what is mandatory, what is optional. So mandatory is the RAS panel. We need to do all the RAS panel and also do the MSI or MMR.
Yes.
These are the 2 mandatory components now, the recommendation by all the authorities that we need to do irrespective of metastatic, all the colon cancer, whether it is it okay, or you do RAS only in metastatic?
Sir, the RAS we are doing only for the metastatic.
Okay, so only for MSI is the for all. But if it is metastatic, you are doing RAS.
Where you intend to give the anti-EGFR therapy.
Okay, fine. So only molecular recommendation in routine is the MSI or MMR.
Yes, and
either early or metastasis, whatever it is. But if it is metastasis, we need to add the RAS.
Yeah, RAS, KRAS, NRAS, and BRAF also.
BRAF. Okay. So the question comes that shall we go for NGS panel or targeted mutation in colon cancer? What is your recommendation?
Yeah, as if possible, if the the setup permits, yes, it has certain advantages like that emerging biomarkers like c-MET amplification, even the PIK3CA, there is some evidence targeted therapies are coming. So yes, the NGS take care of the rare, even the NTRK when the larotrectinib has been approved by FDA in a tissue agnostic fashion. So even the rare mutations, which have some targeted role is there. Although the percentage is hardly 1%, the probability of getting this mutation is 1%. So that will be definitely being getting taken care of by NGS testing. But the disadvantage is expensive, not available everywhere. It needs technical expertise, and the turnaround time is high. You need at least 2 weeks time, 10 days. So that's some.
So there was a publication in JAMA Oncology, and they have given a data of around 3,000 patients, and they have shown that in majority of the patients nowadays, it is better if possible to go for NGS, as you mentioned, because these are rare. Say NTRK mutation, you said is only 0.35%. But if somebody has no other mutation, but if you got an NTRK, then we can give some hope to the patient. Similarly, like there are some other PIK3, you said that there are some rare mutations sometimes come up, so that may come to the play. In a general recommendation, if there is non-availability, we can go out with targeted mutation, because if it is non-metastatic, only MSI is or the MMR, this 4 gene is enough by IHC is more than enough to give us the information. If it is a metastatic, we do all the panel of RAS mutation is fair enough. But as you said, the turnout time, cost, and everything, there is some small possibility. But if we don't have it, we should not be feeling very bad that we miss the NGS, because NGS is not that great in colon cancer.
Yeah, like you cannot compare it with the lung actually. The way.
Yeah. In lung, there are so many targets, even in breast also. But here, there are not so many things, only few. But already you have covered that this HER2 is very limited, but there is some role. But again, HER2 should be done in metastatic only,
Yes.
not in the routine cases. And probably when we are exhausted all our resources, then we can look for HER2 because it is like around 5% only. The rate is only very 5%. And if it is positive, then only we can go for anti-HER2 targeted therapy. So finally, Dr. Sunil, would you like to put some light on ctDNA? It is a very hot cake issue in colon cancer. They are telling that in colon cancer, you can do so many things with ctDNA. You can use ctDNA for asymptomatic diagnosis, minimum residual disease, adjuvant treatment decision, treatment monitoring, even metastatic targeted treatment options. So many options now they are trying to promote in favor of ctDNA. Could you give some light on ctDNA?
Yes, you are very right, sir. The most important role the ctDNA that has come is in the post-operative patients to detect a early recurrence in the subclinical form, because those patients, there is I don't remember the paper right now, but there was a very good publication. Actually, I have not put those slides. I have already used this slides in one of my previous presentations in the molecular testing, because the time was just 30 minutes over here. So there was a very good publication which has shown that if the post-operatively, if the ctDNA is still high, so they are the candidates who are going to have a recurrence, and it was very statistically significant. So post-operatively, it has for diagnosis. I will not say that ctDNA is the role maybe in the research, but for post-operative early the detection of the recurrences, for that the ctDNA has shown a very a good role. But as of now, we are not getting so much requisitions for that actually.
So just for knowledge of our colleagues, so to do a ctDNA, we need the blood sample or just simple blood sample of the patient?
Blood sample, sir, plasma, it is done on that.
Plasma is fair enough.
Yeah.
So the problem, the challenge is whether it's a tumor DNA or the somatic DNA. That is because 5% against somatic DNA is coming up. So is it an issue that which type of DNA we are picking up from the sample to give us the information, or any circulating DNA is fair enough, tumor DNA is fair enough?
Sir, any circulating tumor DNA is fine.
Great. So I think, thank you very much, Dr. Sunil. Within this 1 hour time, I think you have given us a very descriptive information about the histopathology. I think it was very informative, because I think the list that he has given, we should try to discuss with our pathology colleague that this checklist should be followed, so that we don't miss any point. Because if you miss a point, maybe that is we are missing information which will be helpful for our decision making, and also the discussion with the patient about the prognosis. And now, especially in colon cancer, now everybody says that more is not good. So that's why de-escalation is an issue. When escalation was a treatment, escalation was an issue, but in colon cancer, now de-escalation is again an issue. And as we know, if it is MSI high, sometimes we can avoid in early stage the adjuvant treatment. And even we should avoid the 5-fluorouracil because it is not effective there. So all this type of information are coming up from this molecular pathology. So again, I want to thank, and now we know that in our program, our academic partner is Sanofi. May I request the representative of Sanofi to say a few words. And in the meantime, Dr. Sunil, would you mind to share the presentation with me by mail so that I can share the PDF with all the colleagues?
Yeah, sure, sir. We'll do that.
So Sanofi representative, somebody, would you like to make a comment?
Okay, thank you, sir. Good afternoon and assalamu alaikum, honorable chairperson, respected speaker, and most valued invited healthcare professionals. It's my privilege to have been asked to propose vote of thanks to this scientific event. This is Nahid Hassan, Assistant Manager on Oncology on behalf of Sanofi Bangladesh Limited and my entire team.
They were not audible.
Nahid, we cannot hear you, Nahid. Maybe line has some issue. Nahid. So I think we lost Nahid. We are almost at the end of the program. I'm very happy for the wonderful participation. I see some of our senior colleagues also joined. So thanks for your encouragement and also for all the participants who made the program. Your participation is the key of the success of this program. And we will be continuing the session on colorectal. And any question that you have, we can always try to respond. And the email number of Dr. Sunil will be there. You can communicate with him. He's a good responder. When I communicated with him with many issues of my real life, he responded very well, and that will be helpful for you. And we will be sharing the recorded version and also the PDF to you, everybody. So Nahid, are you back?
Yes, sir. I'm back, sir. Sorry for the disruption, sir. May I continue, sir?
Yeah, please.
Okay, thank you. A big thank to our Honorable Chairperson, Professor Dr. Muhammad M.A. Haiser, to inaugurate the event and his valuable presence. I would like to express my sincere thanks to today's speaker, Dr. Sunil Pasricha, Senior Consultant, Rajiv Gandhi Cancer Institution, India, for giving an excellent presentation on role of pathology in colorectal cancer. I would also like to acknowledge our today's moderator and academic secretary of Oncology Club, Dr. A.F.M. Kamaluddin sir, for his valuable presence and feedback. As you know, since Sanofi Bangladesh is the pioneer of oncology products in Bangladesh, and our originator brand Eloxatin plays a very vital role in the management of colorectal cancer. So from very beginning, Sanofi always patronizing these kinds of academic and scientific session for the knowledge development of the for the healthcare professionals. I also extend my thanks to Oncology Club for developing this platform, and we are privileged to be the part of this kind of academic session. With all of your support, hopefully we'll collaborate many events in near future. Until then, stay safe. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Nahid. So I want to, at 4 o'clock we are supposed to finish. We are just on time. So I want to thank again our speaker, because we know they are in a very tough situation in